A low fog lingers in the valley below the basalt cliffs, and from the high tower of a monastery carved into the rock, a solitary bell tolls the hour. Its bronze voice rolls through the frost-bitten pine forests, across broken roads once gilded by queens' processionals. Now, only wolves and wandering monks tread there, and the stones echo not with hymns, but with silence. In the dim light of early dawn, she stands. Wool and iron wrap her body like defiance. Her breath coils skyward in ghostly tendrils, rising like incense to gods who no longer answer. She is a relic unblessed, unburied, unbroken. And though her name has been scratched from scriptures and erased from cathedral walls, the wind still remembers her syllables. They called her Infamia Regina, the shameful queen, but shame does not rule empires. She was born beneath soot-stained ceilings, in a castle thick with smoke and secrets. Her cradle was oak charred by fire, her lullabies sung by dying nurses. Before her bones had hardened, her fate had been traded sealed in scrolls inked by trembling scribes, stamped by men with rings who dined, while peasants bled dry outside their gates. She was married before her first bleeding, a child garlanded in iron and roses, sold to a man whose name came with titles, and whose touch came with bruises. He was a warhound with teeth sharpened by campaigns and eyes empty as a storm, but when he died, it was not by sword. It was a cup, dark wine, a convulsion, a silence. She never claimed the poison, nor denied it. They said she smiled at his funeral. Widowed, unweeping, she took the throne with calloused hands that bore no rings, only the ghost marks of blades. She outlawed the sale of girls. She taxed the clergy whose coffers were fat with penance gold. She opened the grain vaults in famine winters, and gave land to those who'd only known chains. Her crest carved into stone and stitched into banners was not a lion or eagle, but a serpent curled around a rose. Beauty with fangs. In the cathedral ledgers, her reign was a stain briefly mentioned, then footnoted with warnings. Witch. Usurper. Infidel. The ink stank of fear, but within her walls by firelight and fever, she wrote new laws in careful Latin. She heard the mourning songs of plague widows and returned their husbands' lands. She walked through leper colonies barefoot, her hair uncovered, her eyes unafraid. Her priests whispered curses behind bowed heads. Her lovers disappeared before dawn, and yet she ruled. They feared her because she did not fear them. They feared her dreams, those violent crimson visions where her eyes wept rivers and wolves spoke in men's voices. They feared her crown, too, heavy and jagged, cursed, they claimed, by a murdered saint whose tomb she had raised to build a library. She wore it anyway. Then came the war, not announced by kings or councils, but by tremors, rumors first, then thunder. 1,000 boots churned the roads to mud. Across the valley, fires bloomed on the horizon like poppies in spring. She summoned her generals, but they were all bones now, or ghosts or traitors in waiting. So she went to the battlements alone. Her hair was unbraided, flowing like dusk itself. Her sword, a relic too large for her frame, dragged sparks across the stones. Behind her, the flag of her houses Herpent and Rose caught fire, its silk devoured slowly by the wind, and in that smoke, a memory stirred. A girl, barefoot in candlelight, pressing her palm to flame. "I will not be silent," she whispered. The girl had no crown then, no allies, no kingdom, just scars and the echo of her own defiance. But the woman she became stood now, not as a girl made queen, but as flame made flesh. Arrows cut the sky. Ladders thudded against stone. The air tasted of iron and ash. She did not flinch. From the hills rose horns, low and cruel. She heard the chanting holy war. They called it an army cloaked in righteousness, funded by bishops she had humiliated, and led by a man who once kissed her hand and called her sister. Now he came with siege towers and sermons. Still she did not flinch. At her side, only the silence of the dying castle. Tapestries sagged from soot. Statues cracked. The chapel roof collapsed the night before, as if heaven itself refused to shelter her. But she did not pray. She lit the braziers herself. She broke open the old armory. She summoned the last of her knights, withered, scarred, limping men who had followed her when others spat. They kissed her ring and stood at her side, as towers fell and gates screamed. The battle raged for 2 days. On the third, the dawn was gray and bitter. Snow began to fall, not gently, but like ash, thick and choking. The enemy breached the keep. Blood smeared the mosaics, smoke replaced song, and yet she remained, sword broken, cloak torn. She stood atop the altar steps, not as queen nor martyr, but as witness, to all of it, to the price of memory, to the erasure that would follow, to the statues that would never bear her face, to the stories twisted by frightened men. She saw the final night fall, she saw the blade raised against her, and then darkness, but some say no body was ever found. Some say her wolf-shadowed armies vanished into the forests and await her return. Some say she walks still in the fog before dawn, with eyes that bleed rivers, and in secret, passed hand to hand, there are letters signed only with a serpent and rose. They speak of rebellion. They speak of a queen who once said, "I will not be silent," and far beyond the broken valley, in a place where monasteries dare not write her name, a child learns to read by the firelight of stolen pages. She traces the serpent with her finger. She whispers the name she is told not to know. She is not alone, for stories, true stories, do not die in cathedrals. They bloom in the dark, and the darkness is waking. A raven cried across the moors, its call slicing through the wind like a warning too late to matter. The first snow of winter fell in silence, blanketing the broken stones of forgotten kings, their names worn smooth by centuries of frost. In the hollow belly of a kingdom gone feral, a fortress crumbled like a carcass, long picked clean, and outside its blackened gates, barefoot peasants knelt, their breath clouds, their fingers trembling as they reached to kiss the hem of a woman's tattered skirt. She did not flinch, she did not bow, her crown was not forged of gold, but of scars, and beneath her fingernails, blood had dried like rust. She had not been born to rule. She had been carved by ruin, molded in grief, sharpened by betrayal, and now she stood not as a queen in velvet, but as judgment in flesh. Her name, it no longer echoed in the halls of power. It was etched once into stone by a trembling monk, and chiseled off weeks later by trembling men. Yet among the lowborn, her story spread like wildfire through dry thatch. She began with ink, not with swords, not with royal decrees. A scribe's daughter, her hands were calloused from quills and wax, her eyes ruined by candlelight. She translated laws she would one day rewrite in blood. When the kingdom's royal line shattered a chain broken by its own rust, it was not knights who stepped forward, but her. The lords gorged themselves on the last of the stores, and when the smoke of betrayal rose from every outpost, she did not plead for peace. She fed the hungry from the grain cellars of traitors. She unrolled parchments, rewritten by her own hand, bearing seals made of bone. And when lords rose against her, refusing her authority, she did not send threats. She sent back their signet rings nailed through their palms. Then came the fire. When they came to burn her court, her advisers begged her to run. She stood instead atop the keep, her hair unbound, her armor black with soot, and flung open the gates herself. Let them come, let the fire judge them all, and the flames did not consume her. They crowned her. From that day, even her enemies called her the Salt Queen. She never wore silk again. Beneath every cloak, mail, beneath every smile, a blade. Her voice, oh her voice. It fell like a cathedral door closing. When she spoke, stone listened, children fell silent, and the guilty trembled. The people feared her, but fear in those days was a kind of love. When famine withered the crops to dust, and rats grew fat on what remained, she traded her dowry pearls from the southern sea for seed grain. When the priests refused her sacrament, branding her unholy, she carved her own altar into oak and bled upon it as the snow fell. Her prayers did not rhyme, they roared, they sobbed. She rebuilt what others had let rot. The libraries burnt in raids, she restored them, stone by stone. When nobles passed decrees in secret, she branded their hands with ink, a mark of shame visible in torchlight. She forbade private whippings. She forbade arranged child marriages. She outlawed the hunting of beggars for sport, and yet she took no husband. Dozens came, men in furs, men with bloodlines longer than rivers, men who bowed with knives hidden in their boots. She refused them all. Love, she once whispered to the moon, is for those not bound in iron. At night, she walked alone through the frost-bitten gardens, her breath forming halos. They say she spoke then to the stars, asking if there was room in heaven for women like her, women who broke thrones to build altars. Her enemies multiplied like rats in spring. One winter, cloaked in white fog and false piety, 3 assassins came dressed as monks. They knelt at her table, shivering, speaking of redemption. She fed them bread warm from the oven, and in the bread tears, collected from mourning mothers, whose children had starved while lords fattened. The bread was soaked in sorrow, and spiced with slow silent death. None left her hall alive, yet she aged not with bitterness, but with weariness. Her hands, once swift with ink and steel, began to tremble. Her voice cracked like old wood, but still, she walked the battlements each morning. Still, she carried the sword once meant for her father's grave, and then, she vanished. Some say she died in her sleep, her breath stolen by the winter wind. Others swear she walked into the salt marsh barefoot, and let the earth take her. Her bones, the scribes say, were scattered in the muck by traders. No tomb, no statue, no psalm, but the old women, the old women remember. They whisper her name over newborns' cribs. They tie red thread around their doors when the wolves howl, and when storms come howling across the plains, ripping banners from broken towers. Some still see her shadow in the wind, cloaked in frost, eyes like flint. She was not a queen born of bloodlines. She was a queen born of silence, of famine, of ink and fire. She was the page rewritten, the law reborn, the fury made flesh. And when the wolves cry tonight, listen closely. They do not howl for hunger, they howl in mourning, for their queen, for the queen. And far across the moors, where snow silvers the ruins of her keep, a raven circles once more, watching, waiting, because the winds shift now, and another chapter begins. The storm had no name. It rose from the belly of the sea with the hunger of something older than charts, older than prayer, and slammed its grief into the black cliffs like a widowed god. Waves howled against the stone, white with rage, as if trying to breach the fortress carved into the edge of the world. And there, beneath a vaulted sky torn by lightning, a woman knelt before an empty cradle. The cradle was carved from ash wood, silver-banded, untouched by dust, but no breath had stirred its silks for years. She did not weep, she hadn't in a decade. The sea had dried her long ago, replaced her salt with iron. Her hands, once bound in treaty silk, later in bloodied gauntlets, rested on the cradle's edge like a prayer unsaid. The room behind her was wide and bare, save for maps nailed into stone, their ink faded by candle smoke and sleepless study. There were no tapestries, no tokens of courtly life, only scars stitched across stone and flesh alike. She was queen, but not by birth, nor by the sacrament of ring or altar. She was queen by siege, by hunger, by the long, patient murder of every doubt that stood in her way. They had taken her as a child, to seal a peace that never held. Hostage they called her gift-wrapped diplomacy, but she remembered the iron bars of the keep, where foreign tongues hissed her name, like a curse. She learned to bow with her eyes open, to listen beneath laughter, to slip ink past guards, and send secrets in sparrow feathers. When the king who caged her died coughing blood into his wine, she took his death like a key, slipped into the chamber of power, and slit silence open with her voice. A girl with no fatherland became mistress of one. Men laughed at first, older men, with fingers fat from rings and mouths soaked in ale. She did not argue, she summoned them one by one, offered land they once stole, demanded loyalty with parchment and pain. When one refused, he vanished. When another tested her, his son's body washed up beside his own castle wall, coin in his mouth, and her seal in his throat. She ruled not from love, but from leverage, and an eerie, unblinking patience. They called her many things: witch, usurper, the Black Regent, but never powerless. Even her allies came tethered by guilt or debt. One owed her for the winter she ended by opening his grain vaults before his starving peasants burned him. Another, for the child she smuggled out before a holy purge. She never demanded repayment in gold, only in silence when needed, or blood when owed. Her court was a circle of debts, her throne a ledger of the unforgiven. And then came the child. Born pale in a cursed spring, the babe lived barely long enough to scream. Her daughter, her only. The midwives whispered malformed prayers, priests called it divine judgment, and she sealed the nursery door, and never once said the child's name aloud. No cradle songs, no mourning veil, only a saddle readied by morning, and her cloak stitched with frost. She rode north, away from memory, into lands others dared not map. Through wolf-haunted forests and roads thick with rebel smoke, she crushed warbands beneath her banner, black cloth stitched with a single flame. In towns that cursed her, she built granaries. In forts that resisted, she salted the wells. No diplomat followed, only fire and edicts. Her grief became myth. They whispered she drank only wine chilled with snow, that her skin no longer felt cold, that her heart beat in time with thunder. When a priest claimed her womb was cursed, she had him bricked alive into his own bell tower. When her last lover drowned in a storm returning from the Isles, she stood at the widow's watchtower all night, but lit no candle, only whispered something into the wind that it has never dared repeat. Her soul became shoreline eroded, sharp, immovable. Some named her saint, others spat sorceress. But the land knew better. The land whispered her name in cracked stone and broken roots. She was its storm queen, reckless, relentless, never still. And yet, here she knelt before the cradle sealed in silence. Tonight, she had unlocked the door, not to remember, but to anchor herself. Beyond the keep, her scouts whispered of uprisings in the east. The southern barons stirred again, hoarding arms behind wedding banners. In the north, something worse, silence. Entire villages unlit, their hearths cold, their cattle untethered. She'd felt it before plague, before war, this hush that came not from peace, but from something waiting. She traced a finger along the cradle's rim, as if the grain of wood might speak to her. Once, she had believed in omens, now she believed only in preparation. A knock, not loud, a signal. She rose, spine straight, lips bloodless. The wind outside was rising, bringing with it the scent of ash on rain. Her chamberlain entered with a bow so low it almost broke him. He did not meet her eyes. "They've arrived, my queen," he said. "The riders from the northern pass." And the girl, she said nothing, only moved. In the corridor, torches shivered in sconces, shadows, dancing like ghosts of those she'd buried or burned. Her boots echoed off the stone like war drums. At the hall's end stood the girl 12, perhaps 13, draped in wool far too large for her, eyes hollow from frost and hunger. But those eyes were watching, measuring. She remembered that stare. It was the stare of someone who knew what it meant to be owned, and who had begun plotting her escape before the gate even shut. The girl would be her ward, an offer of peace from the mountain tribes, but the queen saw the truth. This was no gift, it was a warning. Someone had taught the girl to read maps, to listen, to survive, and the queen for the first time in years smiled, not from warmth, but from recognition. She stepped forward, cloak whispering against the stone, stopped before the girl, bent not low but enough. Enough to say, "I see you. Do you know why you're here?" she asked. The girl's mouth trembled, but she held. "To learn," the child said. The queen studied her, then nodded once. "You'll begin tomorrow," she said. Before first light. Then she turned, not toward the throne room, but toward the war council chamber. There more maps waited, more decisions, the future, rising like smoke from the east. As she passed beneath the high windows, lightning struck again briefly, illuminating the sea beyond, writhing like prophecy. The cradle remained behind her, empty still. But not for long. The storm had shifted direction, and in its shadow, the next queen was already learning to listen. The cathedral bells echoed not with the joy of worship, but with the sentence of fate. Their iron throats groaned across the stone marketplace, mournful and slow, like the final breaths of a dying empire. Smoke from the morning torches swirled above the crowd, painting the air in soot and memory. Beneath the bell tower's shadow, the people gathered not as neighbors, not as believers, but as witnesses, silent, waiting, like crows. In the square's heart stood the crimson-draped throne, still empty, a wound of velvet and gold beneath the gray sky. No king sat upon it, no bishop bless it, and yet, its presence commanded reverence, because it awaited a sovereign not born of peace, but of storm. From the cloister's shadow she emerged, not to fanfare, not to grace, but like a phantom formed from ash and ink. 16 years alive, cloaked in mourning black, her veil did not flutter, her boots made no sound. She walked with the certainty of someone who had already died once beneath vaulted crypts, among the whispering bones of ancestors too holy to answer. They had expected her to kneel, to be tucked into a convent, or chained to a foreign prince's side like a chess piece wrapped in lace. But the girl did not know how to yield. When the crown was offered in the chapel, she took it not with trembling, but with eyes like frozen rivers and fingers that clutched the regalia as if it were a sword's hilt. That morning, she would sentence her own uncle to death. He had raised her, once fed her candied pears, kissed her forehead with wine-sour breath. But he had also bought mercenaries with stolen tithes, and whispered sermons not of God but of power disguised in scripture. He forged scrolls, he bribed monks, he planted coins in the mouths of priests and knives beneath altar stones. But the girl knew war before she knew love. She had memorized siege strategies, while others learned embroidery. She had mapped bloodlines the way other children traced saints in stained glass. Her father had died poisoned in a banquet, choking on a toast of peace. Her mother had bled out in birth, clutching a cross that broke in her grip. By 13, the princess walked the halls alone. She passed frescoes of martyred prophets. Their eyes rolled to heaven and paused before the mural of Saint Lycus, only one who carried a blade instead of a book. At night, she whispered not to God, but to ghosts, and they answered in the creak of wooden beams, the sigh of tapestries, the weeping wind beyond the battlements. Her first decree: free the slaves of the salt mines. They emerged from the tunnels pale and shivering, their wrists raw from iron. She touched their hands with her ungloved fingers and whispered, "You are men." Her voice was dry, hoarse from fasting, but they wept, not from pity, but from hearing their humanity spoken aloud. Her second decree outlawed the iron collars used in brothels. She walked the alleys, where girls younger than she were kept like livestock. She threw the keys into the hearth, and watched the metal blister and shriek. "No more chains," she said, and though the lords grumbled, none defied her yet. Then came the plague. The physicians fled first, followed by the nobles, but the princess remained. She covered herself in veils soaked in vinegar and lavender, and rode into the villages astride a gray mare. She lit pyres, held the hands of the dying, and buried her own sisters in frost-kissed fields with her bare, blistered fingers. The people began to kneel not from fear, but awe. Her uncle hated her for that. He sent whispers before swords, accusations, scriptures twisted to suggest she ruled without divine blessing. He bribed bishops to denounce her as a false vessel, a girl possessed by the spirits of pride and wrath. But she summoned him not to beg, not to barter, but to judge. The hall that day held breath like it held secrets. Her uncle entered robed in gold, smug behind the mask of religion. But she did not rise. She sat on the high seat, her chin resting on her fist, eyes dark as burnt pages. She spoke one sentence: "The God I serve does not fear men who bleed." The silence after those words was a cathedral in itself. He ranted, he invoked doctrine, he cried treason, but her court did not move. When she stood, even the tapestries seemed to shudder. The trial lasted 3 hours. He never left the chamber alive. Now, on this morning, she was queen, but the wind carried ash. The rebellion rose not from distant enemies, but from within, from men who smiled at her feasts and sharpened daggers at her back. They called her impure, witch queen, demon girl. They said her rule was unnatural, her strength a perversion, that no woman should wield fire and justice in equal measure. When the cathedral burned, it was her sanctuary that crumbled first. They dragged her through the ruins like an offering to a wrathful god. Her crown was broken, her robes torn, but she did not cry out. Her silence mocked them. At the center of the square, the same throne awaited. Now, she stood in chains. But the people did not look away. They had once knelt to her, and now, as she turned her head toward them, her gaze did not ask for pity. It did not seek forgiveness. It demanded memory. A flicker of wind caught her hair, revealing the bruises along her jaw. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but no sound came. And yet, all heard what her silence thundered. I was yours, and I remained, when all others fled. The executioner approached with steps like drums. The crowd did not cheer. No priest read a benediction. Only the bells rang again, this time faster, shrill, desperate. When the blade fell, the sky did not weep. But the river took her ashes with gentleness, carried them beneath bridges, past cities, into the sea. Years passed. One winter morning, a fisherman found something tangled in his net, a ringgold, chased with the seal of Saint Lysa. It was warm to the touch, as if it had been worn only moments before. He did not speak of it, but the rumor spread that the girl queen, the orphan with fire in her veins, had not truly gone, that she waited still, in cathedral echoes, in weeping veils, in the prayers of slave children who remembered freedom not as dream but as decree. And somewhere, in the stone chambers of old ruins, a crimson throne remains untouched, awaiting another hand unafraid to bleed. A bell tolled through mist-thick mountains, not for mourning, but for marriage. Below, the mountain city flickered like a chalice of embered wine. Stone streets steamed with spilled mead, the scent of roasted pheasant rising into the sky like prayer. Laughter twisted between alleyways, tangled with lute strings, and the clap of dancers' boots. Men cheered with mouths stained crimson from ruby vintage, figs candied to silk on silver trays, oil lamps casting halos over flushed faces. But above it all, beyond merriment and meat, past the wine-drenched veil of festivity, one window remained dark. Behind it, a queen stood silent. She did not descend to the feast. She did not drink the wine. Her fingers, adorned with rings once pried from the hands of traitors, ghosted over the mirror's rim. Her veil fell from her shoulders like morning silk, pooling at her feet in the quiet of her tower. It was her wedding night, and her groom lay dead in the hall below. His throat had not been slit. No sword had sung. He had choked quietly, grotesquely mid-toast, the laughter of his kin frozen to ice as he clawed at his throat. No one saw the queen move. No one saw her eyes flicker toward the goblet. No one saw the prayer scrolls, hollow and curled with poison script, hidden behind the altar's drapes. She had not screamed. She had not wept. She had waited. Betrothed since infancy, gifted like silk between courts, she'd learned young that power is patience, that survival blooms not in shouts, but in whispers. He had sent her whips as wedding gifts, Latin curses in gold-threaded embroidery, but she had answered with lace stained with ink and resolve, letters coded in verse, recipes folded within hymns, oaths spun in the grammar of queenship and shadow. Now, crowned in a kingdom that once caged her, she ruled not with thunder, but smoke. Her voice was never heard in court. Instead, her words moved through men with parchment and coin. Her will rode upon the breath of advisers, cloaked in reverence. She closed the brothels that whispered too close to God's steps. She taxed ivory mongers, whose cargo screamed in silence. She poured gold into infirmaries for the limbless, the forgotten, the mute. The bishops called her unnatural, unholy, unfit. But when they rose against her with sermons and scrolls, their churches echoed to no audience. The peasants had vanished from pews. Their words fell on dust, their letters found no riders, for her spies were midwives, her shadows were blind monks, secrets, once traded over candles, now vanished like smoke from shuttered rooms. She knew who bled, who lusted, who lied. Then came winter, she disappeared. 3 weeks passed like a blade dragged across frost, slow, cold and waiting. No letters, no messengers, no tracks through snow. Her absence rang louder than war drums. When she returned, the city fell still. She bore a child swaddled in northern wolfskin, silent as snowfall. She named him not, told no tale. The court whispered of forests beyond maps, of rituals buried beneath glaciers, of men who spoke with deer and vanished before sunrise. She gave no father, no story, only the child, with eyes pale as morning ash and a gaze that pierced shadows. Some said he walked without casting one. As the years darkened, so did the stories. A bishop, once bold, vanished after accusing her of devilry. A general found hanged by his own banner after whispering rebellion. Her justice was not swift but sure, her mercy, wrapped in riddles, her love, if it existed, buried beneath centuries of frost-bitten strategy. And when at last she died, she did not remain. Her body, prepared by the abbess in the high chapel, vanished before first light, the linens untouched, the chamber door still locked. Only one witness, the abbess, shaking, hands soaked in sacred oil. She swore, through cracked voice and salt tears, that the queen's lips had moved in death, murmuring a language no one had spoken in centuries. Was it a farewell, a curse, a promise? None dared answer. They burned no effigy, buried no bone, and yet, her name appeared years late, retched into bone charms, tied to infants' cradles, murmured in battle prayers, sewn into wedding hems by mothers who feared the silence more than the scream. They called her the widow maker, but others those who lit candles in caves and scratched runes in chapel corners. They called her something else, mother of smoke. Her legend traveled faster than riders, heavier than steel. It reached across rivers and bloodlines, woven into lullabies and last breaths. Some said she was never meant to be flesh, that she was forged in the morning of forgotten gods, that her rule was not an accident of poison, but prophecy in motion. Even now, centuries on, in ruined cities where towers have crumbled, and bells no longer toll, some say you can hear her in the wind, not her voice, but her silence, that haunting pause before vows are spoken, before kings drink from goblets, before a traitor dies without a scream. The mountain city has changed, but the smell of cloves and ash still clings to its stones. The bells still ring, sometimes without hands, and in the highest chamber, untouched for generations, the mirror remains silver-clouded with time, dust dancing like memory. Some nights, flickering just behind the glass, a veil moves, a queen watches, not waiting, not mourning, but remembering. And far in the north, where snow never melts, and wolves howl at stone altars, a figure moves across the ridgeline. No shadow follows. Torchlight flickers against limestone walls, casting shadows that writhe like specters behind the congregation. The damp air tastes of iron and prayers long forgotten. Kneeling before the runic altar, the woman does not speak. Her chainmail whispers, as she leans forward, pressing her forehead to the stone cold, ancient and stained by centuries. She is no nun, her vow is deeper. She is queen, forged not by coronation, but by crucible. Queen of a land that prays with blades and buries its gods in iron tombs. They say she was born during a solar eclipse, the sky a black wound, the earth rumbling with thunder. Her cries did not pierce the chaos. They were swallowed whole, as if the heavens already knew her fate. She was the chieftain's daughter, wrapped in wolf pelts and prophecy. Her first lullabies were the howls of the hunt, her first games the tracking of deer through snow. Before she could shape Latin with her tongue, she had gutted a stag with a flint blade. Her name was whispered around fires, carried by storm winds, feared even in infancy. At 14, She was promised to a Christian lord from the southern isles, a silk-clad baron, with a silver cross, and hands that smelled of wine. The wedding feast never came. On the morning of the binding, she vanished, leaving behind only a single she-wolf's fang on the windowsill. She fled into exile to forests thick with moss and old rebellion. Among outlaws and heretics, she shed nobility like old skin. She slept beneath shattered statues of foreign saints, drank from cursed springs, and learned the law of blades. Not might, but merit, not birth, but bravery. Years passed like falling leaves. When word reached her of her father's death ambushed, unburied, skull taken as trophy, she returned. Alone, under the veil of dusk, she rode into the great hall of her enemies. No guards stopped her, no servant dared to breathe. She walked across their hearthstones, uninvited, and dropped the charred skull of her father onto their fire. The silence broke only when she spoke one word, like an axe falling: choose. And so they did. Those who bent the knee were spared. Those who did not, became the mortar of her walls, the bones beneath her throne. The moat swelled red for 3 days. She reforged her father's shattered sword, naming it Silence. Its blade bore no inscription. It needed none. No jewels ever touched her flesh. Only steel, leather, and a single pendant, a weeping eye carved from obsidian, passed down from some forgotten northern creed. Her throne was oak, not gold. Her court was filled, not with jesters and minstrels, but scribes, blacksmiths, and warriors who had killed and wept. Each year, on the eve of winter, she walked the grave field of her fallen, placing a black feather on each stone. She knew their names. She remembered how they died. And in the silence between footsteps, the crows never cawed. She forged alliances in blood, not rings. Treaties were carved into flesh, not parchment. The Highlanders called her the Iron Widow. The Southerners called her the Pagan Flame. Her people simply called her Shield Mother. Under her rule, the land changed. Famine waned. Plague shriveled like a beaten hound. Roads became safe again, lined not with gallows but with torches that stayed lit through the night. Children no longer disappeared into the woods. Wolves fled at the scent of her, but peace is a fragile crown, and love is a dagger in the dark. He came to her as a monk, robes torn, voice like honey soaked in ash. He claimed no gods, only wisdom. She let him sit at her table, let him whisper into her silences. For the first time in years, she laughed. She allowed him into the parts of her castle where no man had tread, into the chambers behind the altar. He betrayed her with a kiss. It was not poison, nor steel, it was scripture. He convinced her war priests that her soul had been claimed by something unholy, that the weeping eye she wore was a mark of the damned, not the divine. When the torches turned against her, she did not flee. She walked barefoot to the altar where she had once been crowned, the obsidian eye around her neck, the sword Silence in her hands. The priests awaited her, but not with rope, with fire. She knelt, prayed, then rose. What happened next is fractured in the telling. Some say she fought them all, and won before vanishing into the mist with not even a wound. Others say the altar swallowed her whole, that it cracked open like a mouth and drew her into the stone. The priests who remained were later found hanging by their own entrails, their faces carved into grotesque masks of rapture. Only one truth remains. Her body was never found, but her sword was discovered embedded in the altar, the obsidian eye resting beneath it. Neither could be moved, not by man, beast or time. And the altar weeps. Still, each winter villagers hear footsteps through the snow, though no prints remain. Torches go missing from doorways, and black feathers appear in windowsills. Children born beneath eclipses speak tongues no priest can name. And in the forest where she once trained wolves, stones have begun to form a circle again. The old faiths stir. There is a whisper on the wind, a name spoken only by crows and dreamers. A name that carries with it the scent of fire, the rhythm of hooves, and the taste of blood in snow. Some say she never died, that her soul was bound in pact to a northern deity whose name was etched into bone and breath, not books. Some say she waits, and some the mad, the mourning, the monarchs pray that she does not return, for the land has grown soft again, and the altar still weeps,